Mr. President, I will vote to confirm Judge Kavanaugh.
Judge Brett Kavanaugh will likely become the next U.S. Supreme Court justice after Senator Susan Collins said she will vote yes for the president's nominee. Collins had faced pressure from both sides of the aisle over her vote. In a nearly 45-minute speech, the Republican from Maine defended Judge Brett Kavanaugh and slammed Democrats for their actions during the confirmation process. Collins also said that while she believes Christine Blasey Ford was sexually assaulted, she does not believe Kavanaugh was responsible.
The facts presented do not mean that Professor Ford was not sexually assaulted that night or at some other time, but they do lead me to conclude that the allegations failed to meet the more likely than not standard. Therefore, I do not believe that these charges can fairly prevent Judge Kavanaugh from serving on the court.
Moments after Collins announced her decision, West Virginia Democrat Joe Manchin tweeted that he too will vote yes. He's the only Democrat to support confirming Kavanaugh. Moments after announcing his decision, protesters swarmed Manchin's Senate office. He told reporters he had to, quote, deal with the facts in front of me. Manchin's support gives Kavanaugh a 51-vote majority in the Senate without the need for a tie-breaking vote from Vice President Mike Pence. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is Washington Post congressional reporter Sean Sullivan. Sean, thank you so much for your time. Sean, how are lawmakers reacting to the events of Friday afternoon?
Well, it's been a pretty surreal scene here on Capitol Hill, something that we really haven't seen any time in recent history. Republicans are relieved, they're excited, they're happy that they are now on target to get Brett Kavanaugh confirmed to the Supreme Court in less than 24 hours. Democrats are pretty demoralized. I talked to one Democratic senator who said that he was as sad and upset about this whole thing as he'd been since joining the Senate. So it's a really, really polarizing mood right now here in the Capitol.
Now, Senator Collins is not up for re-election this year, but Senator Manchin is. How much did all of that play into their decisions?
Well, it's impossible not to look at these decisions without also considering the political implications. And you're right, these are two entirely different situations. You have Joe Manchin, who is running for another term in a state that is very conservative, in a state that Trump won overwhelmingly, in a state that has a lot of Republican voters who like Trump and who want to see Brett Kavanaugh confirmed. And so he's been under a lot of pressure from the right to do this at a time when he is going to go to voters in a matter of weeks and say, hey, I want your vote. I want, another term in the Senate. Now, Susan Collins is not in that situation. She's somebody who has crafted a reputation for many years as a moderate, as somebody who's a deal maker, who works with both sides, but she is not staring at a re-election bid, at least not immediately. Right now, she could face a challenge now in the future as a result of this. But two different situations and two different dynamics that led to these decisions that we saw from these two senators today.
And now we understand that Senator Collins and her staff were recipients of threats and some obscene calls and messages from protesters urging her to vote against Kavanaugh's nomination. Is it clear how much of an impact all of that had on her decision to vote yes?
When you look at her speech on the floor today, and it was a lengthy and pretty extraordinary speech, it was about 44 minutes long. She gave a very detailed explanation of why she decided to vote for Kavanaugh, the merits that she thought he had, and some of the problems she saw in the story that Dr. Ford told when she revealed her allegations. So, when you look at the situation, it seemed all along that Susan Collins was somebody who, from the outset, when you look at the first statement she issued after Kavanaugh's nomination, was somebody who was open and, wanted to get to a point where she could confirm Kavanaugh. But of course, the protests have been weighing on a lot of senators here in the Capitol. and it's added volatility to a situation that's already been tense.
Now, she addressed the sexual assault allegations against Kavanaugh and sort of laid out an argument for why she ultimately did not find in those allegations a reason to not confirm him, because she did not believe he was guilty of them. But what about something that other people have pointed out too, which was his temperament, his demeanor during the hearing, and perhaps his issues of credibility? Did she address that?
Well, that's a question that I think is going to follow her now, even after this speech and even after tomorrow's vote, because the focus of her speech today was on his qualifications and, of course, these allegations. Democrats have been, for the past few days, more and more raising, concerns not just about the allegations, not just about Kavanaugh's record, but indeed his temperament and the partisan tone that they say that he struck when he appeared before the Judiciary Committee for a second time. When you look at somebody like Susan Collins, who has crafted this reputation over many years as not being a fire thrower, as being somebody who is a moderate, a centrist, somebody who can cooperate with both sides, it may make people wonder, and it may draw criticism from Democrats who say, this is going to undercut your record, Senator Collins, of trying to be a consensus builder when you've supported somebody that, we've shown with evidence is somebody who has been, at times at least, pretty partisan in the counterattacks that he's launched.
Yeah, I found it interesting that she did not address that in her very long sort of speech there. So, Sean, what about Michael Avenatti and the allegations made by his client, Julie Swetnick? It almost seems as if that hurt the case for not confirming Kavanaugh rather than helped it.
Well, it's something that Republicans have pointed to and used to try to argue that the sum total of all of these allegations amounts to a partisan attack against Judge Kavanaugh, against Donald Trump. Avenatti is somebody who has said openly that he might even run for president in 2020. And so, Republicans really did seize on his connection to this entire episode and his involvement in with Julie Swetnick, and used it to sort of go to their base and go to people like Susan Collins and say, hey, this has been something that is a partisan fight. Democrats are trying to take us down in a partisan way. And so, it's something that's going to be discussed, I think, in the coming days and perhaps even beyond, what that allegation and what Avenatti's involvement did to convince or not convince senators on both sides of the aisle in terms of how they want to ultimately vote.
Right. And Sean, with the midterms almost a month away, who does the battle over Kavanaugh's confirmation help more, Republicans or Democrats? Because it certainly has seemed to fire up both sides.
It really has fired up both sides, and I think it depends on which areas of the country, which districts, which races you're looking at. Going into this week, Republican leaders were very, very concerned. They were concerned that if they didn't get Kavanaugh confirmed, that an already deflated conservative base was going to be even less inclined to turn out in November and support Republican Senate candidates. They were worried these voters were going to say, what has the Senate Republican conference done for us? What have these incumbents done for us? Now they have something to show, something tangible that they can go to voters and campaign on and say, hey, here's what we delivered for you. Here's why you have to give us more time in the majority. But as you mentioned, on the other side, Democrats are really, really angry about how this episode has unfolded. And when you look at some of these districts, particularly swing suburban districts in the House, this could have a pretty detrimental effect against Republican candidates, and it could boost turnout for Democrats in the battle for the House. So it could help, it could hurt both sides, but it depends on which districts we're looking at and which states we're looking at.
I'm thinking particularly of those sort of independent or moderate woman voters. They might be the ones who are most vulnerable from the Republican perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you look at the special elections so far this year, and when you look at some of the primaries, when you look at turnout, this is something that Republicans have eyed and they've been concerned about. Suburban women in these swing districts voting for Democrats in big numbers. This is something they have been worrying about for months, and something they think that could ultimately potentially control the House to the Democrats in November. So, we'll see what happens in a few weeks here. Voting's already underway in in some states. And
yeah,
so
we're counting down.
There'll be plenty of time to campaign.
That's right. Sean, and as you know, President Trump is holding a rally Saturday in Kansas. He'll hold rallies next week in Iowa, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Kentucky. Now, these are all states, though, that the president won in 2016. So why is he focusing on these states and not those states where Republicans are more vulnerable?
Well, the simple answer is in some of these states and districts, many of the districts that Republicans are vulnerable, these are places where Trump is not popular and where the Republican candidates don't see him as somebody who could help their cause. It's somebody who could actually hurt their cause when it comes to winning over some of these swing voters that we're talking about. So the role that Republican officials, Republican campaign officials that I've talked to envision for Trump is going to places where you have a very, very loyal conservative base, but a base that may not turn out in midterms. And that's why you're seeing the president focus his energy in conservative areas, because Republicans want him in places where he's already popular, where he's not a polarizing figure, and where he has the ability to convince a voter who might otherwise be tempted to stay home that they actually need to vote in November for the Republican candidates, even though Donald Trump himself is not on the ballot.
Thank you so much, Sean, for your insight.
Thanks so much.